I'm Greg DePalma, and you're listening to Prime Sports Hockey with Jan Levine on the Prime Sports Radio Network. On today's show, we're going to get you caught up on the top headlines from the first half of the season in the NHL, including the best and worst teams, the latest trade rumors, key injury news, updated Stanley Cup odds, picks, and more, as Prime Sports Hockey on the Prime Sports Radio Network starts now. All right, it's Tuesday, the 30th of January, 2018. Thanks again for tuning in to Prime Sports Hockey with PSN hockey editor and RotoWire.com writer Jan Levine. You can find Jan's reports at RotoWire.com. They're called Barometer Reports. You can also follow Jan on Twitter at AirJan23. And Jan last time we spoke, Jan, we were talking football. We'll be continuing to talk football as far as Jets talk here on the network. But your backbone is hockey, big Ranger fan. And most importantly, though, for this 30-minute show, hockey coverage. And how's everything been going? We haven't spoken about hockey, and it's been a very strange first half.
Well, it's been obviously a pretty good year. I mean, clearly the big story of the season is Vegas. I mean, that clearly is the big story. I mean, I think anybody expected it, and we had some conversations between me and you, between Hockey Stat Minor when he was on over the summers, to all of us not necessarily being 100% enamored with the moves that George McPhee made. And I guess we all have eggs sitting on our face right now because you look at what Vegas has done this year, just in terms of the goalies they've gone through. I mean, Marc-Andre Fleury got off to a good start. He got hurt. Malcolm Subban, Oscar Danks, all the guys that they've had to use this year, and they've gotten tremendous goaltending. The team as a whole has coalesced much better than any of us could have expected. A part of it may have been attributed to the tragedy that took place in Vegas right before the season started. Turned out to be a little bit of a galvanizing point and kind of a touch point for the community as a whole. But you look at guys like William Karlsson, who exploded this year. You look at Riley Smith returning to what he did a couple years ago in Florida. You look at Jonathan Marchessault and the deal that the McPhee did do, where he was able to get both Smith and Marchessault from Florida. He was able to get, William Karlsson from Columbus. We all knew about Marc-Andre Fleury being the guy who was going to take basically number one overall. Parroting away Malcolm Subban from Boston. Nate Schmidt from Washington was a tremendous deal. Getting James Neal from Nashville. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So, I mean, they clearly have to be the story of the NHL right now, at least for the first half of the year, just because of what they've done, what has become the model for an expansion, with all the talk now of maybe a 32nd team being added.
Oh, yeah, good.
Where it looks like Seattle's going to be the team and not Quebec. And I quite understand why they might go to Seattle, looking for the Pacific Northwest, looking for the market there. Maybe themselves, the NHL, not having that market in Quebec, though it's a shame knowing just how passionate the fans are in Quebec. And
sure, I
have a certain affinity for the fleur de lis of the Nordique and wanting to see that all over again. But if Seattle comes in, the rumors are, from what I saw over the weekend, is that the rules for the expansion draft may be exactly the same as Vegas. So all of what we went through the last year and a half of trying to project out who teams are going to keep and teams making deals to try to keep guys under the certain threshold in terms of years or games played or the 7-3-1 or the 8 skaters, all that's going to transpire if Seattle does get approved over the next couple of years.
Well, I think the big, I guess the debate is whether or not this is good for the NHL, that an expansion team has been able to play as well as they have. People talking about potentially them as a true Stanley Cup contender. I mean, if you take a look at the futures, even though they'll be skewed a bit because being in Vegas, right now they're a 10-1 shot, so they're co-second choice. You take them out of Las Vegas, they're probably more like an 18 to 20 to 1 shot. They're going to get all that additional money just by being in Vegas. It's just the way that it is. It's the way that it was as far as the books were concerned, even before the season started. So got to keep that in mind. But look, I haven't really heard this said, and I can probably understand it because some of the outlets that I've been listening to, you got a lot of the diehard NHL guys so maybe they're not willing to say it. But I actually think this is bad for the sport for a specific reason. It's good for other reasons, and I understand why people think it's good. But the reason why I think it's bad is I just think I think it sets a bad example of hockey today when an expansion team can have so much success. I'm sorry, it just does. And if it, because look, I don't expect, I would wager today. Now I'd have to see what kind of deals they make at the deadline or in the off season, but I would wager today they're not even a playoff team next year. I think this is a fluke. I don't believe it. The only reason I think it's not a fluke, or its possibility of it not being a fluke, is just because of what I just said. Is that I do believe that if this is true, and they're actually competitively over the next several months, and then next year again, going to be a really good team that fast, that just does not say enough about the talent level in the NHL today.
Well, I think the talent level is there, but you also took away key components from teams, especially ones that got past that, within their first 2 years of being a player in the NHL, and that opened up the population base in terms of how many people are available. What would have happened if the NHL said, look, we're gonna make it that you can't grab a player who was in the first 3 years of his NHL career? How big would that population be now? Look at Toronto. When you look at all of their kids, look at Nylander and Marner and Matthews and all those kids that they have there, all of them for the next expansion draft, and let's say if it was in a year, they all would be eligible for that draft. So if you built your team around youth and the ability to build through quote unquote some cost containment based upon having guys who you have on RFA contracts or entry level deals before they become RFAs, and even as RFAs, if you're not signing them to the longer term deal, you have a little bit of cost uncertainty. Now you're now losing all those players because the NHL has brought in another expansion team and enabled them to contend. So, you look at teams like Ottawa when they first joined, or Tampa Bay when they first joined. You look how porous they were based upon who was protected in those drafts, and then take a look at Vegas. And yeah, I think the rules were skewed to help Vegas be a contending team because they were expanding in that new market. They didn't want to see what happened in the markets that they expanded to originally happen there. They needed to get a boost initially in terms of getting the fan base interest because you didn't have any quote unquote locals. So that's been disproven to a certain extent. When you mix it all together, it's a part reason why they changed the rules. But I can understand why people are viewing it now that really they really gamed the system to give Vegas an advantage. But give McPhee credit, he took good advantage of that, of the options that were given to him, and did a good job of building it. Now, all that said, I don't disagree with you. I would not be shocked if Vegas doesn't make the playoffs next year. I think everything coalesced beautifully for them this year. I don't know whether or not that'll be the case next year.
Well, what is it exactly? I mean, if you think, because if I think Las Vegas, I think James Neal right off the bat. Okay, but who else are we thinking about with Las Vegas? What actual players and talent do they have where you go, oh yeah, these are 3 or 4 guys that give them a couple of years, man, and these guys are going to be, they're going to be all playing in the All-Star game.
Well, I think it's kind of hard not to say what you've seen out of Marchessault, who's been a kid who's been able to
yeah,
score.
we've heard of him. Sure, we know who he is.
Never had a set role, right? And then you
Okay.
look at Carlson, who's taken that step forward this year, and maybe it is an aberration, but it's kind of hard right now to rule it as an aberration in terms of the explosion he's had with consistent ice time.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not necessarily exactly akin to the NBA, where in the NBA you get the minutes, you normally get the points. The NHL there's a lot more responsibility than just getting the minutes. But you'll take a look at Nate Schmidt, who's another guy that Washington never should have lost. I mean, we talked about them maybe re-signing Johansson and letting TJ Oshie go. But they ended up deciding not to go that route and therefore had to trade Johansson. And then they lost Schmidt, who's a guy that they probably should have kept for their defense. And Schmidt's clearly taken a step forward. Then a kid like Colin Miller, who's got a blast from the blue line, who can really shoot the puck. Now, maybe he's not going to be an all-star, but he certainly is a solid component of that blue line, and similar with Shea Theodore, who Anaheim gave up.
Now, are they going, and should they make a few deals at the deadline? And if so, what kind of deals?
Well, I mean, they clearly don't need a goalie, right? Because they have basically a really good starter in Fleury and a very good backup in Subban. Mm-hmm. Offensively, there had been some talk that they might want to deal James Neal if they weren't going to resign him, but Neal's come out and said that he wants to stay long-term in the organization and doesn't want to go anywhere.
Okay.
So that's another guy who's basically going to be staying relatively long term. You don't have to worry about losing him potentially.
Yeah, but what would you do if you were Vegas? I mean, the guy is not exactly
if I was
young.
Vegas, I might add one more experienced blue liner if I can. If I was going to do anything, that might be the route that I go. But I'm not necessarily definitively I would go that route. But he that may be one direction in which I go in, is I might want to add one more experienced defenseman, and then
everybody wants to do that.
But not even a 1-2. You can even add a 5-6, a guy who's been through the wars a little bit.
Okay,
right?
so you wouldn't do much then. You wouldn't make any. You wouldn't go crazy and make the biggest. And but okay, so then let me ask you though. But why? See, this then I guess maybe is the reason why I just don't believe in what I'm seeing, because if they believed in what they're seeing, then with all these additional assets they still have, why wouldn't they make a couple of moves to try and win a Stanley Cup this year?
Because you also have to marshal your resources appropriately, and because you also need to make sure that you follow the plan that you followed in the past, which is why I'm saying that plan can just thrown out the window to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
You also have to prepare for the downside risk, and if you look, if they honestly think they are a contender in the league and they think that they can get through 4 rounds of playoffs, then by all means go ahead and make a deal. But here's the thing. Are you giving up one of the kids that you drafted this year? Are you giving up a Brandstrom? Are you giving up a Suzuki? Are you going to give up one of those top prospects that's supposed to basically be the piece of your organization for the future in order to get maybe a short-term gain for a guy for maybe a year or two?
Well, what's the weakness in the organization?
I'm not in a position where I do that now.
What's the weakness in the organization compared to a regular NHL team?
I think you don't have top end. Probably don't have top end offensive talent. You have good offensive talent, right? But we've talked about that first line. That Smith, Carlson, Marchessault line, their first line. Then Perron's played very well for them. David Perron, Eric Hollis had a really good year. We talked about James Neal. But when you get beyond that, Cody Eakin, Alex Tuch has been pretty good, but they don't have the offensive depth that other teams do. And when you get into the playoffs and teams start to take away what you do well, which is, that first line, how good it's been, then all of a sudden you need your secondary aspect components to score. And I don't think they have enough secondary ones to score.
All right, so Las Vegas, obviously the big story, but they are not the best team. The best team was a team that we talked a lot about last year. We kept thinking sooner or later Tampa Bay is going to get hot. It just didn't happen. But we also we're pretty confident that they'd be able to start all over from scratch this year and accomplish what they weren't able to accomplish last year. And that is why and I'll be posting our first futures report a little bit later today up on the website. We'll include the odds for the Stanley Cup and so forth in there. And I'd be surprised, of course, if you didn't have Tampa Bay in there, because I'm going to have Tampa Bay in there. They're the favorites right now to win the Cup, and they're the clear favorites. They're 6-1. No other team is in the single digits, so they're kind of all by themselves. What is the biggest difference? I mean, it's got to be health, right, from last year to this year?
Well, I mean, you have Stamkos. That clearly helps. Mm-hmm. You had Vladimir Nemetsnikov, who's basically had an absolutely tremendous year for them, who's seen some first-line duty on the team. So that's definitely a huge one.
Where does he come from?
Has taken another step forward, if that was possible. In my opinion, he may be the MVP favorite right now. Braden Point is another kid who I've liked a lot, and he's taken a step forward this year. Yanni Gourde is another one who I don't think most people have ever heard of, and wasn't one that came into the season with a lot of publicity, but he's had a tremendous year, especially, even strength. And then you have kids like Tyler Johnson. Chris Kunitz hasn't done much, but I think the addition of Kunitz was more so for the playoffs, and then defensively, the Jonathan Drouin for Michael Sergachev deal has worked out incredibly favorably for Tampa Bay, because Sergachev has been a stalwart on the blue line. I mean, that draft came with a conditional second-round pick to Tampa if Sergachev didn't play 40 games this year. And Tampa Bay decided, you know what, we've had some injuries on the blue line. Sergachev has played tremendously well. We are not going to bench him just to make sure we get that draft pick. We're going to try to win it all this year. We want that number 1 seed. They've rolled him out there in most of the games this year. He's proven worthy of that time. And then they also added Dan Girardi to provide another veteran presence on the blue line. And lastly, and it's something we discussed before the year, it's the migration of letting Ben Bishop go and not resigning him, which we expected. and also using Andre Vasilevsky. I mean, you and I both talked even during the playoffs a couple of times how much we both like Vasilevsky as a goalie. I don't think there's anything we've seen that has taken away that thought process from us.
All right. And are they going to have a significant are they going to do anything at the trade deadline that's going to rock the world, or do you think that a small deal here and a small deal there, and primarily what they have now is good enough to win the cup?
I think primarily what they have right now is good enough. You may tweak around the edges and add a depth forward or a depth D-man like most teams like to do. But you look at that team, and it's kind of really hard to find a tremendous weakness, and especially now that Victor Hedman's coming back. Once he comes back, Andre Palat's out for a while, but Palat should be back by the playoffs. It's very hard to find a weakness on this team. That's something that could be that you think they need to fix in order to make a long run in the playoffs. So we all seen every team kind of make a move or two to try to do so. So it wouldn't be shocking if Tampa Bay looks to get maybe like a third line center or maybe a defensive specialist to help them come playoff time.
All right. Also in the East, having a nice run right now is Boston. So now this McAvoy kid has been a big story for them. Of course, Marchand is. This guy. He's right now. He's the face of the franchise right now, right, Marchand?
That's both positive and negative. But to me, if it's not Marchand, to me, it's going to be Patrice Bergeron, who's been there for years as a Selke Award winner, a guy who's put up points, likely going to be a Hall of Famer down the road.
Yeah, he should
or
be.
Really, David Pastrnak to me is the kid that I think that everybody's going to know who David Pastrnak is if they don't know already.
Okay, all right. And do you like what they've got there? The mix of youth and veterans. Do they? And of course, they do have Rask. So do they have everything they need to win a Stanley Cup?
Yeah, if they're healthy, that's the key. Always come playoff time. You look at what Danton Heinen has done in terms of taking that step forward in his season this year. We talked at the draft a couple of years ago when Boston had those 3 picks in a row, and they passed on two names. They passed on are Kyle Connor, who's in Winnipeg, and Matthew Barzal, who's on the Islanders. But the one name they did get is Jake DeBrusk, and DeBrusk has proven to be a pretty solid winger for them, filling a full-time role. So those are two players, Heinen and DeBrusk, who have really taken a hold of the opportunity they were given. Anders Dork was given that shot earlier in the year. He was sent down but brought back up, with Marchand now suspended for 5 games. David Krejci's finally healthy again. You talked about what McAvoy's done, though. He's out now following the ablation to remediate the heart arrhythmia that he had, but he should be back within the week or so. You look at Krug, you look at Brandon Carlo, you look at Chara. Tuukka Rask was not very good early in the year, but he too has rebounded after a very slow start. You would kind of think that Boston would appear to have everything they have, especially if Chara is the kind of guy who can eat minutes in the playoffs, and you have a big four of Chara, Carlo, McAvoy, and Krug come playoff time. That's going to be awfully difficult for a team to beat, especially going into TD Garden and trying to beat them up in Boston.
How about their coach?
Cassidy's done a very nice job. There were some questions last year, but I don't think anybody's really questioning what he's done this year.
Okay.
He's used youth when needed to use them. You can see with the expansion of what Heinen's done compared to his last year, what Ryan Spooner's become this year. The David Backes, acquisition in general has proven to be very worthy this year. Had a good year last year. He's been fairly good this year now that he's healthy again. He's another guy that brings you a little bit of grit, a little bit of playoff presence. Another guy that you look forward to in the playoffs, being one of those third line guys who can chip in a lot. So you would look at that team and say that they're pretty well balanced in terms of what they have in terms of elite talent on that first line, some secondary scoring. Again, a blue line that I think is good. Do I think it's elite? No, because I don't think McQuaid and Miller are really that particularly good for your bottom three pair, third pairing. But it's decent enough if your top four is playing all the minutes. Almost like what Chicago did a couple of years ago when they used their big four exclusively in the playoffs.
All right, and then Claude Julien moved from Boston to Montreal, but that hasn't worked out so far. So the Canadiens, after they were pretty hot a few years ago, that's become a stale franchise. Panthers haven't been able to get going. Buffalo still a cellar dweller franchise. Detroit, okay, whatever. We're all waiting for Toronto to take that next step. So the other two teams really in that division, the Atlantic, that are newsworthy would be the fact: do you believe Toronto is ready to take that next step? Will they and should they make a significant deal at the deadline? Because they have an awful lot of youth talent. We know that. And what about Ottawa? What in the world has gone on with Ottawa after such a hot year last year?
Well, I think Ottawa really thought at the beginning of the year that they were one player away, and they identified that player being Matt Duchene. And Duchene has been, to say horrific since he's gone there is probably putting it mildly. I mean, he clearly has not panned out in any way, shape, or form like they expected in terms of just production as a whole, in terms of fit on the team, at least of right now. Then you look at guys like Bobby Ryan, who's had an injury-prone year and hasn't really panned out. You look at a guy like Jean-Gabriel Pageau, who was the Johnny Druce of last year's playoffs, and he too has turned a little bit back into a pumpkin this year, especially compared to what you saw in the playoffs last year when you thought he might be taking that step forward. Derek Brassard has really regressed tremendously. He didn't have a great year last year. This year, he really hasn't taken that step forward. I mean, Mike Hoffman has been very good. Mark Stone has been very good. And
what about Carlson?
Stone, because his 3-year contract expires after the year. So in terms of offensively, you have a lot of guys that haven't produced at the level that you expected. And then defensively, I mean, Carlson's been Carlson, but they jerk Thomas Chabot up and down. Even Carlson himself has not had the kind of you expected coming off of the heel surgery in the offseason.
Should they trade him?
And then between, what's that again?
Should they trade Carlson?
Have they traded him yet?
Should they trade him?
Should they trade him? Look, if you honestly believe that you are not going to contend and there is no way, shape, or form he is resigning there, given where that team is and as painful as it would be to trade your captain, I think they have to trade him. I think they basically have an expiring asset that they are probably fairly confident likely won't be back there when this contract expires. He's young enough that he can get a very long-term deal elsewhere, and you can maximize your return and rejigger your entire organization. I think it almost behooves them to go ahead and make that trade rather than just losing him for nothing.
Yeah, I'd sure like him in Vancouver along with Brock Besser, that's for sure.
I mean, he's got another year. He's got the end of this year and next year left on his deal. It's like Ryan McDonough with the Rangers. A little different just in terms of talent. He's also making $1.75 million more per season, I think, than McDonough, who's making about $4.7 million per year. So that has to be a wee bit of a factor in terms of what your return is. Though you can eat some salary if you can get a bigger return, but the problem is nobody knows what Eugene Melnick's going to do, and that creates a huge issue in terms of trying to be able to move forward as an organization.
All right, and Toronto, they okay? Should they make a big move?
I mean, it's interesting with Toronto. I mean, we've all talked about defense a lot with that team, and we've all talked about their defense taking a step forward. And right now, I haven't seen that defense really take that step forward that I expected it to. I mean, Matthews has had another big year. Marner has been a little bit inconsistent in terms of his second full year. You can say the same thing about Nylander. Nazem Kadri hasn't had a particularly great year. I think James Van Riemsdyk right now is more concerned about his free agency. And I don't mean necessarily that it's fully impacting his play, but he clearly hasn't been the JVR that we used to see in the last several years. Marlowe's been a decent fit, but if you look at the production Marlowe's had, his production is likely going to drop again for the third straight season. And he was brought in to bring a veteran presence to the roster, which is what he's done. But there's a lot of players that haven't met the expectations associated with them when they came into the season. Morgan Riley's had a very good year, and he likely would have been an all-star candidate potentially if he hadn't gotten hurt. So he's one of the few blue liners, in my opinion, that's had a really good year. Hainsey had a good start to the year, but he too has regressed. And then between the pipes, Frederick Anderson's been good, not great, but good, but he's been hurt by the blue line around him in terms of the guys that are there, not really taking that major step forward, especially defensively. I mean, guys are having pretty good offensive years, but if you look at their goal differential and you look at their plus minus from year to year, you can see some regression that's taken place, especially defensively, which is the thing that we talked about with Toronto needing some remediation coming into the season.
So can they and should they make a big deal? I mean, they've played now a couple of years with these young kids. Are they?
Well, I mean, Matthews was a rookie last year.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
it's
sure.
only their second year. I mean, you have to
I mean, they
expect growing
overachieved
pains.
last year, no question about that. I mean, nobody
Yeah,
expected them to make the postseason, but they did, and now everybody expects more. I'm not saying to sell house. I'm not saying that, but isn't there like an Eric Carlson type guy? Isn't there someone where they can go, hey, why not? Let's go out there and let's bring in a big piece, not of rental. Let's bring in a big component here, and let's try to add a major superstar piece to this team.
look, if Toronto was going to go out and make a major move like that, I would not bat my eye in a heartbeat. If you think your organization is at the level where you can take that quantum leap forward, and all you need is that stud blue liner, which I think we both believe is the case in Toronto, then by all means use the assets you have in your organization to go get Eric Carlson.
And they do have enough assets, do you believe?
I think they probably do. You would have to steal one of the kids
Sure.
to do that, which would be painful. But I think they might go ahead and do that. And I think it would be Nylander over Marner who goes first.
Okay. In the Metropolitan, wow, big surprise. Washington's in first place. Oh, boy, I don't even know what to tell you.
Pittsburgh got off to a slow start. So,
yeah, but that's expected, isn't it? I mean, when you go to back-to-back Stanley Cup championships, you win them both, you're going to get off to a slow start in year 3. I mean, you're just battered and bruised.
We said before the year started that we expected some regression, that we expected Pittsburgh off of back-to-back years would have a difficult, would not have the kind of year they expected. The thing that to me is a bit more challenging is you haven't seen the play from Matt Murray that I think all of us would have expected.
That's true.
Jared is very good as a backup. Smith has been very good as a backup in terms of, filling in the gaps for Matt Murray.
Why do you think that
Murray,
is? Do you think
that's to Murray because he's dealing with the passing of leaders, had a tragedy in the family.
Okay.
But Murray, they gave up Fleury, and I think we all think that no issues in terms of giving up Fleury because they weren't going to bring him back, and it didn't make sense to keep him. And you're going to lose one of the two, so you had to get rid of one of them, and it made sense to maximize an asset. But Murray hasn't had the kind of year that you expected. Justin Schultz has been injured. He hasn't had the kind of year. But all that being said, and you and I talked about this before the season started, all that matters is what happens is after game 82.
Of course.
You get them to the playoffs after 82 games.
Yeah.
And then let's see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be absolutely nuts if Pittsburgh would have faced Washington in say the first round of the playoffs to take Washington. You'd have to be a lunatic. So I'm sorry. Look, I'm a Washington National fan, and after what I've been dealing with, I told we were doing this baseball show in the postseason, and I told my co-host, I said, look, I'm going to blame you guys if we lose. You guys in Washington. I'm going to blame you guys because that's all it is. You guys choke. That's what you do. It's contagious between the Nationals and the Capitals. All you guys do is choke. And the Capitals decided to go at it again. No, don't make any wholesale changes, right? I mean, there's no major difference from this year's team. What is there? Is there a big difference?
No, I don't think there's a big difference from this year to last year. Look, here's what I think. We've talked about Washington in the past. We've talked about Pittsburgh in the past. Some teams have that mental makeup to win in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And there's other teams that don't.
Mm-hmm.
And until Washington proves to anybody that they have that mental capacity to get past that next level, don't think anybody anymore is going to take them to advance for far in the playoffs.
Yeah, you
just
have to
because
be crazy.
they seem to lack something when it comes to when the calendar hits April and the playoffs begin and they got to try to make a run. They, for some reason, and for whatever reason it is, just can't do it.
All right. And Columbus, I didn't like the goalie situation last year. I told you that. So I'm not going to believe in them again until they go through at least one playoff round. Is there any? I know the Devils have played a lot better than people think. I know the Rangers and the Islanders and even the Flyers have also played better than people think, while the Rangers and the Islanders just haven't been able to get things going. So give me a team in there out of those metropolitan teams in that division, out of those four that you think has the best chance to make a run.
Boy, they all have warts. They all have pluses. They all have minuses. If you believe Larry Brooks on Friday, the Rangers were pulling a trading places like Mortimer and sell. If you listen to Larry Brooks today, he believes that the Rangers can make a run based upon their history. You look at the Islanders, and now that they got that stadium issue resolved, or for the most part resolved, where they're playing in Belmont down the road, they're going to play about half their games at the Nassau Coliseum.
Belmont.
They're a team that's
Where they're playing at the racetrack?
They're going to be played. That's where the new arena is going to be built, right there.
When's that going to be built?
2000, I think it's 3 years, but they will be playing half their games at the Nassau Coliseum
for the next 3 years.
Until then, which is something that everybody wanted it.
Okay, all right. And so, you tell me what you think about the Rangers, though. You tell me. Do you think the Rangers should sell off or what?
Honestly, Greg, I vacillate every single day. Every day I vacillate. The issues that exist on this team are not getting better.
Yeah.
They're bleeding shots. Honestly, like a drunken sailor drops whiskey. They were giving up 30 plus shots a game. I think it's 16 of the last 17 games. They've given up 30 shots a game. They're being outshot, I think, by an average of almost 8 shots per game. Most of the shots are coming from, high danger areas where they've been bailed out by the play of Henrik Lundqvist and Andre Pavlik. So the defensive issues that exist with this team are not getting any better. Offensively, they were carried earlier in the season by a really strong power play that now lacks both Chris Kreider and Kevin Shattenkirk, who are out with injuries on that unit. So it's kind of hard for me to be positive. On the other hand, you keep saying, well, if they can kind of stay in contention, and you may have Kreider come back in March, and you may have Shattenkirk come back in March, and you do have Henrik Lundqvist between the pipes.
Yeah.
Maybe. But it's fool's gold, right? At this point in time, if you can maximize your return for Rick Nash and Michael Grabner and potentially lock them in and re-sign them at relatively reasonable rates for next year, and then you pop in Elias Anderson and Philippe Heitel, each of whom they drafted this past year, all of a sudden now you're looking at a completely different team potentially. But and Ranger fans will probably kill me if they listen to this podcast. I'm going to go with the Islanders. Yaroslav Halak has looked much better. I don't think he's an elite goalie, but you look at Johnny Boychuk maybe coming back. You look at what Ryan Pulak has done to date. You look at the stadium situation, basically giving the team a little bit of ease of mind and mentally, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're good.
All right. Well, we'll find out. We'll definitely talk more about those teams when we get to. By the way, when is the trade deadline?
I think it's the end of February, if I remember correctly. I'm going to get the exact date, but I was 99% sure it was at the end of February this year.
All right. By the way, Tampa Bay is the only team that I took in my futures report the first one of the season at 6-1.
I'm going to have a little surprise for you on my futures report right now.
How many teams are you going to have in the East?
Right now I'm going 2. I'm going to go 3 in the East for a little bit of money, and I'm going to go for 1 really wild card out West.
Well, again, we have a new system this year, so all of your picks are 100, every one.
How much money do I have left?
No, you don't have a budget. It's it. You're completely open.
Okay.
You can do anything you want. You can spend $1 million if you want, but if you don't make $1 million or make $2 million, then you're going to obviously look pretty foolish. So you can make as many wagers as you want. So just keep that in mind.
All right, so I'm going to go 100,000 on 4 teams.
Not 100,000, but $100 $100. $100 on
100
who?
100 on 4 for 4 teams right now.
Okay. In the East?
No, 3 in the East, 1 in the West.
Just give me the 3 in the East.
Okay, I'm going to go Tampa.
Okay, 6-1 Tampa.
Actually, I'm going to go Tampa. I'm going to go Boston.
Boston 10-1. So those are the top.
And Blitzburg.
And they're 14-1. All right, so those are the 3 teams you've got in the East, and I only have Tampa at 6-1. Let's go to the West, and the big surprise there, besides Vegas in the Pacific Division, is Winnipeg in the Central. So now we've talked a lot about Winnipeg. Kind of figured, I know you liked them a couple of years in the postseason as an up-and-coming team. They fell flat on their face last year. What's the big difference this year?
Connor Hellebuyck. Hellebuyck has really proven to be a number 1 goalie. He's taken a massive step forward this year. In the past, you know how much I've liked Helly, but he hadn't gotten the job done. They brought in Steve Mason after his struggles last year. Mason really didn't play well earlier this year, dealing with concussion that sidelined him for a while. And then Hellebuyck literally just took the job and ran with it. Completely ran with it. Now, they're going to have a pending situation in terms of what they're going to do down the road with Jacob Trouba and figuring if they can keep him long term or you're going to have to deal with him. But you look at the talent that's on that team, and you look at, everybody seems to always forget Blake Wheeler, but you look up at the end of the year in terms of the numbers that he's posted, and they're really impressive. And then you add in guys like Patrick Line and Kyle Connor, who I mentioned earlier. And they're doing it with Mark Scheifele, who's out, who's become a true number one center, and Nikolai Ehlers and Brian Little.
So it's just a matter of just playing together more, getting more experience, and developing, or has there been a component? And again, the goalie situation is definitely huge in hockey. We get that, but were there any other new pieces this year that put him over the top?
Well, Connor's come up from the minors and gotten a full-time job.
Okay.
And they gave a role to Josh Morrissey on the blue line.
Okay.
And Morrissey's been very good on the blue line this year. He's made up for the struggles that Dustin Bufflin's had this year.
All right.
So Morrissey's definitely been a key component. And the other one is that the resurrection of Tyler Myers. So the Calder Trophy winner from several years ago with Buffalo, whose career had kind of nosedived a little bit. He's really taken a step back forward this year compared to where he's not where he was when he was as a rookie. But he's definitely become a very solid defenseman in Winnipeg, helping out that blue line. So you look at Morrissey and Myers and Trouba, all of whom have been good, and even a reduced Dustin Bufflin, and that's a pretty good 1-4 there.
Okay, but are they this good? And
are they this good?
Like Vegas.
I don't know if they're this good,
yeah,
but in that arena, they're awfully hard to beat at home.
Yeah.
And you look at the offensive talent on that team, especially when Scheifele comes back, and they're really dangerous come playoff time.
Can they make
you may have three lines that could score on that team.
Can they make a deal? And we know that it's not a destination spot for free agents. Why would it be? Unless you're a local kid. So can they make a deal? Should they make a deal? And if so, would they be able to bring in someone that they would feel comfortable that would be okay playing there for a few years?
So should they make a deal right now? I'd say yes, because Trouba's got an ankle injury and is out 6 to 8 weeks. So in my opinion, given where they've been so far, I think they need to make a deal to maintain it. Will they make a deal? I'm going to put it at 75-25 that they will make a deal, but I think they're more likely to try to find an expiring asset than one who's going to have to try to re-up their long term.
So more likely some guys that have been through the wars in the Stanley Cup playoffs, guys like that
Correct.
Can kind of give them that experience in the playoffs. Okay. Now Nashville, of course, is still hanging in there. No surprise, Nashville, one of my teams and my future teams. So they've been one of my teams for 4 years now. And any reason for me to not feel even more confident this year that Nashville is going to win the Stanley Cup, considering they came very close. And if Pittsburgh is ready to kind of just peter out, then why shouldn't Nashville really truly be the favorite? What is the reason that Nashville is because I'm actually a little bit surprised to see Nashville only at where are they? They are only at 12-1, so they are like the fifth choice. That kind of surprises me after what they did last year.
Well, I think Philip Forsberg has been hurt, and that's hurt them offensively. I don't know if they've been as good as we expected. Now, granted, the Kyle Turris deal hasn't worked out particularly well for them. He's been better of late.
Okay, makes sense. Though.
He was better. He was good early. He hasn't been good lately. Ryan Johansson's had a fairly typical Ryan Johansson year, though he's taken a step backwards this year compared to what he did last year when he first got over there. 2 years ago, he really was good. And then last year, he took that major step forward. And now he's been more of the Ryan Johansson we saw at times at Columbus, where I wouldn't say he's loafed, but I can say that he hasn't been as productive. I mean, overall, their whole team, in my opinion, has been nowhere near as productive. Now, they obviously missed Ryan Ellis due to injury almost the first half of the season. But when he's come back, now you look at the blue line, and that blue line has the big four. With Yossi, Ellis, Subban, and Ekholm. So Ekholm himself has been okay, not great. He's been better though than he was last year. Though he's the guy I thought last year in the playoffs was their best defenseman and expected a quantum leap. He's had a step leap, but not a quantum leap. But I think the biggest difference is we've always had questions about Pekka Rinne. But you look at what Rinne's done last year and the kind of numbers he's posted, and he's just been dominant. I mean, he's been absolutely phenomenal this year, building on the playoff run that he had last year. And to me,
Yeah.
that's the biggest difference in Nashville from year to year.
And look, so we see this all the time too. To me, this is also Stanley Cup final hangover. You're going to see that the first half of a season. Sometimes teams can kind of build off of it and go on in a tremendous run, but other teams can be like this. They're playing well. Some guys aren't playing like they played last year, but there's no doubt in my mind, as long as they don't have any major injuries, players that are going to miss time in the postseason, no doubt in my mind that this team is going to be the team to beat in the postseason. I'm just sorry. I think they're going to all gear back up once the postseason begins and go, all right, now it's time to go win that cup this time. And I've seen this. I've seen this story written many times before. So as long as they stay away from the injuries, I think they're the team to beat. All right.
I would say they're one of the favorites coming out of the West. I think if you're going to compare them to Vegas, just given their experience,
Vegas,
you have to basically give them a tier over Vegas.
Yeah, I don't even.
But there are other teams out there. You said Winnipeg is going to be in a difficult matchup if they meet in the Central Division, which would be the second round.
I'm not. Again, I just. These teams like Winnipeg and Vegas, they get to the postseason. I'm sorry, it's a completely different animal. You know that. I'm not worried about those teams. Sticking in the Central, St. Louis is St. Louis. So what's the difference with St. Louis this year? Dallas, they have definitely made changes. So now they're starting to learn how to win and as far as playing respectable defense. So where's been the change there? And I know you know the answer to that, of course. Colorado has been a big surprise as well. So Minnesota's Minnesota. They're kind of hanging around. And then, of course, Chicago, you just wonder how much longer Chicago's going to have with this group. They seem to be getting older and older. So let's go with Colorado and Chicago. Why is Colorado so good right now?
Well, I think, harkening back to the Ottawa discussion, removing the Duchesne headache that had kind of hung over this organization for a year plus. It was definitely something that helped in terms of kind of clearing the locker room. Then that top line of Gabriel Landeskog, Nathan McKinnon, and especially Mikko Rantanen, who's taken a major step forward. It's helped them defensively. Before Tyson Barrie was hurt, he was having a good year. With him out, they called, Nikita Zatsarov started to get more time. He played well. Eric Johnson took a step forward. And then the biggest difference has probably been the play between the pipes. I mean, Semyon Varlamov was having a good year. Varlamov went out, and then Jonathan Bernier became the second coming of Patrick Waugh and Martin Brodeur combined. I mean, he was, during that, 10-game win streak, he was tremendous between the pipes. And granted, that likely will dry up moving forward, even when Varley comes back. But that play between the pipes, between that duo, but especially Bernier lately, has been the big reason why Colorado sits in a playoff spot right now.
All right, as far as Chicago, Duncan Keith, Seabrook, these are veterans that seem like they're hanging on by a thread. Do you think is this just one season, or do you think this is the beginning of the end for those types of guys who've been through the wars? Crawford has just not really been the same the last few years. And then Panarin has been a disappointment. We know how important his scoring was to this team.
Well, I mean, Panarin really hasn't had the kind of year that we expected, especially when he came back to play with Kane and with Taves. But you can kind of say the same thing about Brandon Saad. He, too, hasn't had the same kind of year that we expected in Columbus. So that's part one. Duncan Keith hasn't had a Duncan Keith kind of year. Brent Seabrook clearly hasn't had a Brent Seabrook kind of year. Then you look at offensively, Jonathan Taves has had an okay year. I mean, we know how good Taves is. I mean, Patrick Kane's been very good still as well. But then you mix in those other pieces that we've talked about in the past that have always been the complementary guys. That this year, Patrick Sharp's been okay, but he hasn't been great. Corey Crawford was good. Now he's out either with vertigo or concussion syndrome, and while Jeff Glass has done an okay job between the pipes, it's not the same as having Corey Crawford. So it may be a combination of them getting old, of them not having the pieces around them, though I do like the integration of guys like Nick Schmaltz has had a good year. Alex DeBrincat has had a year. So there are some younger pieces that they've mixed in where it wouldn't shock me if Chicago didn't get a second wind and made a major playoff run, especially if Crawford is back. Now, if Crawford's not back, all bets are off. But if Crawford does come back, then with those young kids, it might be interesting in terms of what ends up happening.
So you don't think that and maybe they do wait this season to see how it unfolds, but whether they do it at the deadline or they do it in the off season, don't you think maybe it's time for Quenneville, who might be the best coach in hockey? Don't you think maybe it's time for him to go, I need a new challenge, either somewhere else, or I'm willing to stay here for a rebuild, and maybe it is time for Chicago to start unloading some of these veterans?
I wouldn't be shocked, but let me ask a question. Are you moving Taves and Kane?
I would keep one of them.
Okay. I don't think they move either one of them.
Well, I mean, that's how you're going to wind up getting maximum value, though, in return.
I agree, but the problem is each of them are making, what, $12 million a year?
Okay, well, you don't think that they'd be able to?
How many teams are fitting them in?
How old are they?
Chicago going to eat $6 million a year.
How old are they, by the way?
I gotta.
They're not over the hill guys, aren't they?
I think Kane is like 28 or 29 now.
He's in the prime of his
career.
career.
Is likely in the same range.
Yeah, so they're in the prime. It's just that their bodies have been through the wars like they're probably 3 or 4 years older.
So they're each making Taves signed an 8-year, $84 million extension in July 2014. So it's 14, 15, 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18. He's got 6 years remaining on his deal, and he's 28.
That's okay. That's fine.
That's Kane, right?
Sure.
So that's pretty good. And then and Kane signed the same thing. He's a year older. He's 29.
Okay.
So they each have 6 years left at 10.5 mil per year.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if you're a team, if as long as you believe that these guys, that either one of them isn't kind of, to the point where in 2 years their bodies are going to be done, and you just think that they just need their own kind of recharge and a new goal in their careers, go somewhere where they can build a new Stanley Cup championship situation. Then if I'm Chicago, I'm looking to make that deal. And if I'm a team that wants that superstar to get me over the hump, I'm also looking to bring in that deal. Sure, it's great to have all these players and even have 2 superstars on your team, but at some point, if you're going to rebuild, you can't have 2 superstars on your team. You can't. Sometimes when you rebuild, you shouldn't have any. So I'm willing to have one of them. One of them's got to go. I mean, either that or it's not a full rebuild. You can't do a full rebuild if you keep these 2 guys. You just can't, in my mind. I don't think you're going to be able to get enough in return.
Chicago's got a major decision to make, and you're moving either one is kind of dealing a heart and soul kind of person.
Well,
from
sure,
the team. And
but everybody does it.
I think Bowman's going to have a very tough time dealing one of these guys unless he's grossly overpaid.
Who would you rather have? Who would you rather have?
Rebuild.
Who would you rather have? If you're a team making a deal, Chicago says pick one.
Wow. Honestly, as much as I love Taves, I think Kane, only because I think he's a better scorer. In terms of a leader, I'd much rather have Taves.
All right, so it's okay. But you would, if you had to pick one, you say you would pick Kane.
Kane by a sliver, maybe.
And if you're Chicago and you had to trade one, what do you think they would do? Which one do you think they would prefer to keep?
I think Taves would. So here's the thing: Taves might bring the bigger return, and I think with Kane, because of the off-ice issues he's had, I still think there's a concern that he could blow up at any time.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see. I mean, I think that's something to keep an eye on. All right. Also, finally in the Pacific, we talked about Vegas, San Jose. What else is new? The Kings, of course, with a new coach, and they're playing a little bit better this year. Anaheim had those injuries earlier this year. Edmonton has been an unbelievable story this year. So let's talk about the Alberta teams, because I actually added both Alberta teams in my futures, both Calgary and Edmonton. Calgary 33-1, Edmonton at 40-1. And I did Calgary because I know we've liked Calgary a lot the last few years. You liked them a year before I did, and I think this could be their year. We talked about the goaltending situation. I think they've got that settled now. And as far as Edmonton, that of course is just one of the biggest stories in the entire league. You talk about the good story headline for Vegas and Winnipeg. Well, Edmonton's the bad story headline for the league. It is just amazing what has gone on there. What is the reason? What is it? Because everybody thought this was the year they were going back to the Stanley Cup.
Well, I think first is I think we may have just overrated all of them. You look at that team and you look at the offense and how many true weapons do they have. I mean, you look at McDavid and Draisaitl, right? Those two guys are big weapons, and either one of them. I mean, McDavid's had a great year. Draisaitl struggled a bit early on. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins had a year where his career seemed to resurrect a little bit, but he now is out long term with an injury. Pujujarvi finally got called up and he started to produce a little bit, but Maroon hasn't had the kind of year he had last year. Lucic has been good, but he's slowing down. They brought in Camilleri. He hasn't been particularly good. The Ryan Strome deal for Jordan Eberle has been an abject disaster. Kyra's been pretty good for them, but you look at their blue line, and the play on the blue line has really regressed. I mean, Darnell Nurse, recently has picked up his game, but the rest of that blue line has been a nightmare. And Cam Talbot hasn't been particularly good between the pipes. So I think you kind of combine all that together, and it's a pretty easy recipe for disaster compared to what we saw last year.
All right, so so there's no quick fix there. You think
you're spending a ton of money on McDavid and Draisaitl. I don't think you're able to do a lot more. You spend $4 million a year on Chris Russell, who's turned out to be what everybody thought about Chris Russell. So that's going to be a huge impact. Lucic is signed for a while. I think the guy Pujujarvi, if he takes that next step, maybe becomes your third stud forward potentially. And then you're probably going to have to move Ryan Nugent-Hopkins to get some cheaper assets in, but I don't know how many teams are picking up Ryan Nugent-Hopkins.
Yeah, but there's no like black and white there. That's the reason, because I mean, it's crazy.
I mean, there's a combination of issues up and down that team. I don't know if you can point to one specific. You want to point to one specific reason? Point to Cam Talbot, but he sure as hell hasn't been helped by his defense in front of him.
Do they have a locker room issue?
Not as far as I've heard.
Okay.
A
coaching issue?
I'm sure there's probably whispers of stuff that's gone on, but nothing that's explicitly come out and said that this guy's a locker room cancer and we got to get him out of there.
Coaching issue?
Like I said, anything is possible right now. I mean, again, I'm not sure if you say a team that last year went to the Western Conference Finals and everybody thought was going to take that next step moving forward, and then all of a sudden they've done a complete, not a complete 180, pretty darn close to a 180, and you blame it necessarily on the coach. I'm not quite sure if that necessarily is a fair argument either.
All right. Okay. I mean, look, I thought they waited too long, by the way, to make the deal for Montoya. We've talked a lot about Montoya over the last few years as a really good backup, and that's what I think. So, but look, they still got a couple months to go, which is the reason why I put him in my futures report, because I'm not going to go by the overrated thing. I think that's an easy excuse. Maybe you're right, but it's sort of like the Vegas thing. Like, well, maybe we underrated them. I just think those are easy excuses. I think Vegas is a fluke, and I think what's going on with Edmonton is fixable. Because there isn't any major injuries, there isn't any major changes in personnel. There's just guys that aren't playing as good as they did last year, and there's just too much talent on this team for this team to be playing this poorly. So I mean, I get where you're coming from with the defense and all that. I get that. But I think those are fixes. I really do. But we'll see. I mean, you think they make any moves at the deadline, minor moves to try to fix it?
I think they may try to move some of their assets and try to recoup some cap room to make some moves afterwards.
Okay.
I mean, maybe they get hot after the break and all of a sudden, find themselves in a better position. But, they're 10 points behind right now. It would take a pretty substantive, rebound to get into contention.
Yeah, I don't, I know I get that, but, you win 7-8 games in a row, you're right there. And they've got the team that can do that. So that's why I put money on them on the futures, and why not? They're 40-1. Calgary 33-1, as I mentioned, and then the other team is Anaheim, and I thought Anaheim was an easier play, and I'm a little bit more confident with them, even though they're 50-1, because they did have the injuries earlier in the season. But what are the holes there now? What reason do you think that Anaheim just isn't going to be able to put it all together this year?
I actually think they will.
Okay, so you agree. You like them.
I do. I think all the defensive injuries earlier in the year created some havoc on the blue line. They're finally starting to get healthy. Getzlaf is back. He's healthy again. Kessler is back. They brought in Henrique. They're pretty deep down the middle. Granted, I'd like to see a bit more out of Corey Perry, which we haven't seen to date. If they can get that, that'll be a big help. If Gibson is healthy, that is something that has to be factored into the equation. But Ryan Miller's been good enough as a backup. Gibson's been very up and down, but I think he rebounds. You look at the blue line, even though they've gotten rid of Semi Vatanen to get Henrique. You look at those guys. You look at what Raquel done. And you saw how good he was in the All-Star game. Jakob Silverberg. Granted, they've had some injuries. Patrick Hughes being hurt before the year started really was a major impact because they were counting on him. So they've made one deal. It wouldn't shock me if Anaheim tries to get another second or third pair winger. Okay. But that's the team in the West that I kind of like given the odds they're at.
Yeah, 50-1 I think is a must play for Anaheim, and so those were my future plays. 4 from the West: Nashville 12-1, Calgary, Edmonton, Anaheim, and then Tampa Bay in the East at 6-1. You've got Tampa Bay, Boston, Pittsburgh in the East. Who do you have in the West?
I mean, again, I have Anaheim as one of them.
Yep.
That's for sure.
What do you think about Calgary? Nashville. I know you're a Calgary guy.
I do like Calgary, and I do like Mike Smith, and I do like what Johnny Gaudreau's done and Sean Monahan does this year, and I like their defense. I just don't know if I see them
winning it all,
coming out of the West.
Yeah, winning it all. I mean, so you don't like them just yet at 33-1.
Not to go all the way, no.
Okay. Anyone else besides Anaheim and Nashville in the West?
I was thinking Winnipeg, but I may hold myself in abeyance for a little bit just to see a bit more. But that's one of the teams I'm thinking of.
All right. Yeah, I can't imagine Winnipeg. See, they're 14-1. I doubt that number is going to go down much further than that. That means they're going to have to play better than they're playing now. And that would be too crazy for me to believe. But then again, it's been a crazy first half, so anything's possible. So, yeah, if you do like Winnipeg, I think Jan's doing it the right way. Be patient. You're not going to lose a whole lot of money on that 14-1 number. And we'll talk more about these futures and the rest of the second half of the season in the next few weeks. So we'll definitely start to pick things up here on our hockey talk over the next several weeks. And then once the playoffs begin, we'll be on every few days. So, Jan, I appreciate your time as always. Going to any Ranger games?
Actually, right now I'm supposed to go Thursday against Toronto.
And Rangers?
That's gonna happen,
okay.
But the one game I know I'm going to is February 25th when the Rangers finally retire Jean Raquel's number, something that's been long overdue.
All right, awesome. All right, Jan, AirJan23, rotowire.com. Thanks for updating the first half of the season in the NHL, and we'll start to pick things up here in the second half. So Jan will be with us again real soon. Don't forget to check out all our on-demand shows following every live broadcast on the PrimeSportsNetwork.com website. Also, iTunes and YouTube under Prime Sports Network. Follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN. For Jan Levine, I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning in to Prime Sports Hockey on the Prime Sports Radio Network.